Okay, so like I said in the previous video, this one we're really kind of using the same type of script, but just adapting a little bit to include multiple pathways. These ones are going to be more kind of like a boardwalk or just a uniform path on either side, and they're a little bit more rigid too, so you don't have to feel like you have to use a very kind of fluid, natural looking pathway as well. And again, this in this case, that example I'm showing where the landforms around it are kind of sunken in as these kind of more vernal pools or something that could be a little more ephemeral that fills up at some point. Let me turn off the contours so you can see it a little better. So yeah, there's the geometry. And like I said, I mean, yeah, you can definitely integrate the design of the pathway in Grasshopper, but honestly, I think you could do it much quicker in Rhino. Obviously, you can do some of the other kind of modifications to the pathway, like the railings and stuff, pretty quickly um, in Grasshopper. But to get the actual geometry, it's actually pretty easy to just go ahead and do that in Rhino. I know a lot of my videos emphasize the workload being in the Grasshopper, but in this case, it's a little change of pace. So let's take a look at how to do it that way. So again, let's go ahead and create a new document. And so like I said, this is the kind of geometry you're starting with. So I'm actually going to go ahead and create a new layer to draw on. Make that the active layer. I'll change the color. And so, like I said, we're going to draw something that has multiple pathway or multiple directions. It's going to be kind of angular. Um, so what I want to do is just, again, I'll just use the polyline curve and start to kind of dictate what that's going to look like. Something, again, very kind of rigid. I'll even turn off the surface for now. And start to kind of determine where do I want those other pieces to go. So again, this way there can be a lot of kind of variation and options for your pathway. I'm not a huge fan of what I'm doing right now, but let's try something. Does that look cool now? Maybe something kind of like that, I guess. Again, I'm not a huge fan of this, but it is what it is. Maybe, like I said, yeah, like whatever. Um, so let's just shift this over a little bit. So the next thing we want to do is begin to offset these curves. I'm going to keep the center line because that is important for the script, but I'm also going to have its own kind of separate edge. So I'm going to, again, create a new layer to show that. So this will be path edge. I guess we can call this path center. Again, choose a different color. Let's do aquamarine. Hopefully we can see that. So from here, I'm just going to start to offset these. So I'm going to type offset. I'm just going to use a distance of 3. And now I'll just start to select my curves to offset on either direction. And again, maybe you want to kind of have some variation. So maybe in this case, I'll do something that has a greater distance in one case. So maybe now we have 6 feet in this direction, just to kind of mix it up. So that way we can kind of identify this more preliminary pathway versus these secondary pathways. Let's also do it for 3 feet on this side. Perfect. So I just want to make sure I have that kind of lighter green tone wrapping around all those center lines. And now what I'm going to do, I'll turn off my center line, select all these, and begin to trim away so that they're all nice and enclosed or connected. And you have to be careful, like for things like this, it will create an issue of determining whether it's closed or not, whether the curve is classified as closed. So there we go. Pretty quick and easy. I'll go ahead now and close them on either end. Again, I'm probably going to have to do that anyways again later, but oh well. And now I can select all those, type join, and there we go. So now I've got my curve here. And in order to get this to work, you have to do a couple other things. I want to turn off, because I want the actual, again, I'm looking at everything outside of these pathways. So instead of like having to draw it and it's on a non-planar surface, it's going to be a little bit of a challenge. But I can go ahead and, I'll make this the active layer, but I'll select that surface and type dupe border to get a curve around that. And now I can hide that surface again. I'll go ahead and take this curve now and project it to the C plane where I've been drawing everything else. I'll delete it, the original, so now I've got that matched. This is where we can use the curve boolean to actually get those edges. So I'm just going to type curve boolean, select the curves I want to use. So I definitely want this one and that one. I've already got those as closed curves, so I don't have to worry about selecting those. And I'll hit enter, and then I'll just select these two areas. And that's basically going to create those outer ones. So I can get rid of that. So now I've got these two areas. And these are again are what we're going to use to do our surface. So another thing I will, just to make sure it works, is I'm going to actually take this surface and slightly shrink it a little bit, because when they're at the edge, they might not actually project down onto it. So I'm just going to go to that top view. Like I said, I'll just scale it a touch, right? And then I also want to make sure that I raise it above my surface. So there we go. So now we've got our curves that we want to use. So now I'll go back to grasshopper. And again, I'm going to first reference my surface. I'm going to divide it by, again, something like 50 points. I'm going to go ahead and flatten that as well. The next thing I want to do, again, like I said, is use these boundary curves. So there's this one, I have this one, I have these inner ones. So I want to use these to determine or manipulate just those ones. So I'm going to set multiple curves. So I'll go ahead and turn this off. And I'll turn this off as well, or yeah, and I'll hide this surface. Again, we've got a lot of things on that we just don't want to really mess with. So again, we're going to go to curve, and in this case, we do have multiple curves. So I'm going to use analysis and do point and curve. So when you have multiple, so I'm going to drag that into there. It's the same exact logic, but just in this case, it understands that there's more than one. And what's good with, if you use the pointing curves, even if you're using just one closed curve, it'll still work. So I think it's actually a better component than the point in curve, because this one works for either option. The other one just works if it's one curve. If you put in multiple, then it's not going to work, which is kind of annoying. But now we can, again, like I said, use that same logic of whether it's inside. So in this case, we want to actually use the logic of 2, which is inside. So we're going to go again, math, operations, equality. A is equal to 2. And so now, again, it's going to use that same process as before. I'm going to use sets, list, dispatch. And again, I can start to see which ones are actually in those curves by turning that off, right? So now there's all those points in the curves. And what's nice is that you actually don't have to project those out so much, actually project them onto the surface, which is nice. So let's actually try something real quick. I'm going to actually undo that where I scaled them. That way we make sure we get all of them. And we can see that some are tangent. So let's just adjust that a little bit more. So again, I'm going to go to math, operations, and I'm going to use larger than instead of equals. And as long as it's greater than 0, we're okay. So I'm going to do that. And we'll see that it should give us the same result, but it'll just include those additional ones that are tangent. All that stuff works nicely. So I'll turn this stuff off. Okay. And so now we can basically almost mimic exactly what we did in the last one. We'll do one more thing. We'll even use the center lines to help us out. Or we could even just use these. So in this case, I'm going to actually take... no, yeah, we do want to use the center line. Or we just want to use a couple different curves. So I'm going to hide this. I actually don't want... I'm going to turn off the point so you can see a little bit better what I'm doing. So I don't really want those outer ones, so I'm going to select everything except for these outer parts and reference those curves separately. So again, we've referenced almost all of them, or we referenced them all there, but now we're just referencing all of them except those other two. So set multiple curves. And now I can do the same thing where I take those curves, divide them by a number of points. We want these to be pretty substantial too, so I'm going to make sure they're nice and dense. And if you want, you can even make sure to get those corners by right-clicking on this K input and set Boolean to true. And then you can see it gets all those kind of what they call the kinks in your curve. So now again, I'm going to use this. I'll flatten that. And now I'll, again, like before, use vector, closest point. Here's those points. And so now I will, again, remap my distance values. And use my graph mapper, so it's a nice kind of variation in how those landforms get created. So again, graph type, Bezier. As they get further away, they do something different than what they do when they're close. So there we go. I'll turn all that off. And I can probably even get away with turning off that layer. So everything's turned off, so it's a mystery for now. So now we'll go ahead and move these points. And again, the Z direction. And I always like to give this a multiplier to kind of get different emphasis on it. So again, I'm going to do something like negative 15, less than 3, less than 15. Right, so I can start to see how that looks that way. And now, once again, I can begin to mess around with how much variation there is. Is it going that direction? Is it going the downward direction? We have it much more abrupt again, which is kind of cool. You could have it start to kind of cone in like, or kind of wave in like that, which is kind of interesting as well. And then again, we want to join that with that cloud of points. So I'm going to go to Sets, List, Replace. So here's our cloud of points. I'm going to go ahead and get the index of those points as well that I just moved. And now I'm going to use the actual new geometry as well. So this should give us our final product as a group of points. And like I've done in the past, we want to make these grid of points a surface. So I'm going to use the surface from points, give it that expression. Always using this expression of x plus 1 so that you can use the same u count that you started with this. And there we go. So again, there's our landform from our pathway. We can turn this back on so we can see how it looks in relation to it, which is nice. So again, we're using the original surface and we're just using this geometry to determine, so it'll maintain the slope of the actual surface, not this planar surface or the planar curve, which is great. And again, like you can see that it starts to kind of slope away from it. So I always kind of like to adjust that a little bit more. So maybe it just goes from 0.1. I mean, that's even quite a bit. So let's try something like 0.5. Oops. 0.05, sorry. There we go. So that's better. So you can see that you have it like that. Like I said, maybe you want it to do the opposite. If you want there to actually be landforms in between, you can start to do it like that. So another kind of fun way where you dictate your path and have the landforms respond to it versus the other process that we'll show in the next video of starting with your landform that you've created and having your pathway respond to it to fulfill those parameters of a 0 to 5% slope. So, yep, there you go.